Hey everyone, this is Anthony Francis.
This is Casey Casperson.
And this is Steakout. And I'm in the car with Casey, and we are overlooking beautiful shrubbery and trees of all different types. This is quite nice, quite relaxing.
Yeah, there's a old-ass condo building behind it, and they've decided when they built it back in the 50s? 60s, that they were going to go crazy and make it like wavy, but it's pink.
If I could just snap my fingers and destroy this building, just the building, I would do it. I wouldn't even think twice. I'd go get coffee afterwards. I wouldn't even care. In today's podcast, we are going to discuss how, using improv, how you can start a conversation and be engaged in a conversation, any conversation.
Any.
At all.
Literally any conversation.
So if you're at work, or if you're out at a bar and you want to meet someone and you don't know how to start a conversation or how to be engaged in a conversation, this is some really great advice that I think the whole world should really know about. So with improv, what we do is we get a word, and from there we just go forward. It's called long form improv, and we just do scenes for 5 minutes, 15 minutes. We can just connect with each other, with our scene partner, and explore that word, and that word leads us off into other things. You do improv every day when you're talking to someone. I'm doing improv right now. I don't know how my sentences are going to end, but I knew what my topic was, and so I started talking. So none of what I'm saying is scripted right now, and none of what Casey's saying right now is scripted.
I'm not talking.
Because you're not talking, exactly. Don't interrupt me when I'm talking to myself. That's mine. No.
Okay. Tony is talking to himself at this point.
Right. I just don't need you in my podcast. Your podcast. I don't need you in your podcast.
Tony, how do you? So there's a conversation
right.
about something that either I don't know anything about or I'm completely uninterested in.
Right.
But I need to participate in the conversation because it's either like my friends or it's coworkers, but I need to build relationships with people. And the only way to do that is be able to actively talk to them about crap that is interesting to them. How do I do that?
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and start with something that I know you have absolutely no interest in, and that's video games.
That's correct.
And video game culture. So I will start talking to you about something that's relevant and new in video games. And you can let me know when you found something that you can latch onto in this conversation. Cool? Okay.
Yes.
So Dark Souls 2 just came out.
Okay.
It is one of the hardest games. Dark Souls was one of the hardest games and for the Xbox 360, for PC. It's really just unforgiving. It's the enemies are extremely hard. There's no directions. They don't give you a lot of help. The bosses are just brutal. I mean, most games, they give you pretty clear objectives or pretty clear ways of attacking and things like that. But these guys, they come out of the dark. There's blind corners. They just aren't fair. It's a lot of the times the game just isn't fair.
It doesn't sound fun.
Well, there's a huge group of gamers out there that want this challenge. See, a lot of games dumb it down for you. This game, Dark Souls or Dark Souls 2, that's the mountain. That's it. That's the mountain. You have to climb the mountain. It's like Mount Everest. You don't get to play a smaller version of Mount Everest. You either climb Mount Everest or you don't. You're one of the people who's beaten Dark Souls 2, or you're one of the people who hasn't. That's it. The game doesn't make it easier for you. There's no other difficulty settings. That's the game.
You said something about difficulty settings. What does that mean?
So in a game, you can change the difficulty in a game. You can change whether or not the enemies are easier, if they have less hit points.
So if I was to play one of these video games, not the Dark Souls 2, but if I was to play a video game and I'm not a gamer,
right,
I could make everything easier for myself.
Most games have that option to make the game easier for you.
Gotcha.
So the enemies might, when they're shooting at you, they might miss more than they hit you. And the harder you make the game, they might not hit miss at all. And every shot they fire will hit you.
Great. So that's our conversation.
Okay.
So what happened in that conversation that kept me in the conversation with you without knowing a thing about what you're talking about.
Well, what's great about not knowing a thing about the topic, you were able to ask questions and learn more about it.
Right.
You found something in it that you wanted to know about. You didn't want to know about dragons or swords or anything else. You didn't want to know about whether or not it was online. You wanted to know that the game was, what the difficulty settings were in the game. You were interested in that aspect of it.
And how did I get to that point? What was I using? Open-ended questions.
Open-ended questions, right. You asked me questions about those specific topics, and then that's what engaged me to answer you on that. And I loved it from my standpoint. So as the other person in the conversation, you seem to me, and this is something that I think, this is a fact. If you act like Casey just did and you ask questions, when someone's done talking to you, they're going to be like, that guy's a great person to talk to. You didn't say anything. You said 3 lines.
I just asked why, how. And if you can do that in every conversation, now you have to actively participate and listen. So, one of the things that we got from that is that the first game was really difficult, and the second game is supposed to be equally, if not more, difficult. And you could tell that he was really excited about this game, and he's legitimately connected to it. And in conversation, if you can allow people to just talk about stuff that's interesting to them, eventually what will happen in the conversation is it'll end, and that's fine. Or because you've done such a good job of listening and asking questions, they'll eventually come around and realize that they've been talking about themselves or the subject they want to talk about so much, to figure out a way to bring you in and let you talk about yourself for a little bit. Right.
Eventually they'll say, well, but enough about me, what about you? What do you like to do?
Right.
And then you share. And
then I would share. So that's a really easy way to relate there. Another thing that people always ask us is, when you get a piece of input in a scene, how do you know that you guys can do a scene based off of any type of input that you receive?
Right. Well, the thing that I think the problem most people have is not that they can't think of anything. It's that they're constantly censoring themselves. So if I were to say the word, like I'm looking out in front of me, if I were to say the word condo, it's the first word that pops into your head.
Yes. Condo, the first word that comes into my head is old.
Old. Okay, old makes me think of silver. So I'm just coming up with words off the top of my head, and that's where we start to generate input for a scene. Because when you hear a word, you immediately think of another word, an image. You can't stop it from happening. So one example I like to use with my students is, I was walking to the grocery store the other day, and I got some groceries, and then I walked back home, and I unlocked my door, and I went inside. Okay? I tell that story, right? Pretty bland, pretty basic story. What was the weather like outside, Casey?
Warm.
How tall were the buildings?
1 story.
What was I wearing? What color was my my clothing?
Blue.
Okay. What was in my grocery bag?
Bread.
Okay, there's always like bread sticking out of the top. What color was the grocery? Was it a plastic grocery bag or was it a paper grocery bag?
Paper.
See, I never said any of that. Your brain just automatically starts painting pictures. As soon as someone starts talking, your brain starts going. It's when you try to speak out loud that you go, oh, wait a minute. I have to be careful, because if I say the wrong thing, society might shun me.
Right. So that's a great point. So if I say something that we know is wrong, so if let's take your example, we're talking about walking down the street with groceries, and at one point of the scene I start talking about the paper bags, and then another point I come back and I go, God, these plastic bags are really weighing me down.
Right.
I've painted 2 contradictory images. So how do you fix that? How do I come in and say, oh man, the paper bags are great because you always get the stereotypical bread coming out of it. We come back to the scene later and I go, I gotta put these bags down. The plastic's digging into my arms.
Right. Well, you like to put the paper in the plastic.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I do. It's just safer that way. I like the look of the paper, but it's easier to carry the plastic.
Well, you got to put the paper in the plastic, and then you carry it with that plastic exterior.
Of course I do.
And that's it. That's how that's teamwork.
Yeah, and so something that sounds so stupid, you can put together and justify and make it right in a scene. You can do the same thing in conversation. And also, it's perfectly okay in conversation to just admit that whatever you just said is completely wrong.
Right. I mean, for us and for the purposes of improv theater, your partner comes in and justifies any kind of, mistake, I guess you'd call it, or inconsistency, whatever it might be. That's the joy and the fun of it. That can also be the joy and fun of it in a real situation. If you're having a conversation with someone at work, and I think people, or anyone, if you're having a conversation with anyone in the real world, off stage or whatever, and that person was telling you a story about how they bring their groceries in, they put the paper bags down, and then they say the plastic bags. You could say, well, you said paper first, but now you're saying plastic. Oh, I know, you probably just double bagged them or whatever. Like, kind of do the same thing in real life. Support them in making them look good.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Make the other person look good, and they should reciprocate. Right. There are times in your life where people will not reciprocate, and that's okay. Not everybody gets the game, not everybody understands it, but we are mirrors. Human beings are mirrors. And so if you do something, then the other person will more than likely act in kind. If they don't, and they do it consistently poorly, then just
kill them.
I was going to say something less harsh.
Oh.
But yeah, remove them from your life.
Right. Yeah, that's what I meant. Remove them from your life.
There's too many good people in the world to deal with the ones that aren't.
Right. And it's our job to learn these lessons and go out in life and meet people and ask them questions. Get to know people. You know yourself. Go out there and find out what other interesting people are out there, and listen and ask questions and support them, and then they'll come around and do the same for you. And like Casey said, if they don't, then you move on and you find the people that do support you and do the same things for you that you're doing for them. That's wonderful. That's delightful.